Today's episode is brought to you by the Sounds in Cinema podcast. The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. You have been forewarned. Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. What the fuck? I don't know. The El Mariachi Desperado Mexico edition? My name is Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, your friend and mine, the man with a plan, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Hello, Tom.
All I got is piss warm chongo.
You went deep on that Marin voice.
Well, you got to do Marin right. For the record, the cold open of Desperado is one of the best cold opens we've
Ever.
seen. And I can say that with confidence because 75% of the movies we do, minimum, have cold opens. It's this and Rambo First Blood Part 2 are my current top two.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think it's the best scene in either of these movies.
It's one of my first notes. One
I think
of my first notes is this is an incredible fucking cold open.
It may do more harm to these movies than it does good because it's a high that they could never recover from.
Yeah.
I may be biased. I think Steve Buscemi is the greatest American actor working today. So having a whole scene that's just him.
Just him.
Really just a monologue, right? A Steve Buscemi monologue with Cheech Marin, a straight man. Why has no one ever thought of this before? Why does Tommy Chong get all the fun?
Right. I mean, my notes here in order are like, Buscemi's story is such a great beginning. Buscemi is so fucking good. Love this cold open. It's amazing. Those are my first three notes.
Unbelievably so.
Well, we're not there yet, though, Tom, because right now we are ranking these sequels.
Yes.
So for our audience, if you don't know, Robert Rodriguez, the director of these three movies, by vastly different titles. So he started with El Mariachi, which was his first first movie of note.
Yeah.
At the beginning of his career that I think went through Sundance. And so then he made a sequel, but it's sort of a remake / sequel.
Well, this is what I wanted to talk about because it's a kind of sequel we haven't really seen before on this podcast, which is exactly as you said, the remake cum sequel.
Yeah. And
it's a very specific subgenre, and in my mind I relate it to the Evil Dead trilogy and the Mad Max movies.
Mad Max.
There's sort of like you're ostensibly moving forward with the story, but really you're remaking the previous movie. Because you have more money and you're making it better. That's it, yeah. It's like the distinction, I think, from something like Die Hard 2 Die Harder, which is, you could totally say is a remake of Die Hard, is that...
But in formula, in name, you know what I mean? Like...
Well, there's no disparity between them. Like, I think with these movies, there's a production reason to go back and remake something. Either we have more money, we have famous people, we have...
Yeah, right.
We have better effects. Certainly, that's what Evil Dead 2 was all about. Was like, oh well, now we can actually do the things we wanted
to do. Exactly, right.
So, I mean, in terms of what we've done, I would say more like the Final Destination movies. I want to remake this as a comedy. And then the person whose movie was being remade came back and said, no, I want it to be a drama again.
Yeah, right.
So it's like a behind-the-scenes reason to keep remaking the same material. And I suppose, I mean, it's a watch-along, but Star Trek the Motion Picture, you could see sort of Wrath of Khan as like, what would a Star Trek movie look like? What would the same material look like if we got Gene Roddenberry out of the way? If he didn't have fuck it up with his boring banality.
Right.
And that's Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun. So I mean, we go from El Mariachi to Desperado to Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which was actually an idea given to him by his good friend Quentin Tarantino while they were making Desperado. He said, "You know what you ought to do."
Well, that's the other key context here, because I find it impossible to look at Robert Rodriguez's movies without thinking of Tarantino and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at their careers side by side, they've not only collaborated and worked on each other's movies
right,
so frequently, but when you see their movies, you realize that the content and style of their movies imitates each other.
Yeah.
And their movies dovetail.
Yes.
And that's but what's kind of
But I don't think that's a bad thing either.
No.
I think they just have true. They came up at almost the exact same time.
Yeah.
Or at least came to prominence at the exact same time. Quentin maybe has just a few years before Robert Rodriguez, but you can tell that there's just so much genuine affection for each other and for each other's work.
Completely, and it's interesting in terms of the similarities of their work, but also the differences. And what struck me here is that Rodriguez and Tarantino are both filmmakers who make exploitation action genre movies, nominally, that are very leisurely paced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like there's that weird kind of dichotomy in both of their works. However, I always feel like with Tarantino it's intentional and a choice. With Rodriguez, I more often feel like the story just gets away from him a little bit.
Okay.
And the pace of his movies always feels like it's lagging. I mean, in the worst Tarantino, that's true too. Hateful Eight, but
yeah. Thank you. Yes.
But more often than not, when Tarantino slows things down and the plot starts to meander, I kind of feel like I know why he's doing it. I'm not always sure I know why Rodriguez is doing it, except that he's not quite sure of his material.
Okay.
And that came across to me very strongly in these two movies.
Well, I'll have plenty to say about that, because I might have had a turnaround on one of the movies.
Interesting.
On that very subject. So
well, mine wasn't a turnaround, but certainly I'm basing a lot of my judgments on.
No, because I had always had the same thought about that problem.
Yeah.
And remarkably,
as applied to a lot of his movies,
on this one viewing, it was a little less of a problem for me.
Oh, okay.
For one of these movies.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
So obviously, I mean, we're here to rank and declare.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm curious. How did that go for you? We always kind of ask each other, what, easy, hard? Well, like, where'd you sit with all of this?
I didn't lose much sleep over it.
Yeah, me neither.
Which is an apt metaphor for movies that have an inordinate number of dream and fantasy sequences, for no apparent reason. Yeah. So the only caveat, it was very easy. The only caveat to that I would say is I had to watch both movies to the very end before I was sure what I was gonna do with them. But I didn't have to think about it afterwards at all. Like, once the movies were done, I was like, okay, I got the measure of these movies now. But while I was watching them, I was going back and forth a little bit.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I had my thoughts before the movies started, and my thoughts stayed the same.
Oh, okay, interesting.
I came in knowing what I thought how I thought I would feel, and it turned out that's exactly how I felt.
So in summary, you've learned nothing.
Yeah. These movies,
great.
One of these movies was not able to change my mind.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So, well, where you want to go first? Would you like me to go first? Let's rank first.
You want to rank first?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, you go first then.
For me, this was my thought before I watched the movies and my thoughts after I watched the movies. I am Desperado first and Once Upon a Time in Mexico last. And I say last instead of second.
Oh, interesting.
And this is what I'm most curious about is what you're going to do and how you're going to declare. But
because it's the third in the series.
Right.
Well, I tell you, I think there's a trilogy exception to my love of thirds.
Okay.
I think when it's in the context of a trilogy, for some reason the rule doesn't apply.
They fall short.
Yeah, because when we did Back to the Future Part 3,
That's true.
I had some problems with that. Return of the Jedi is an amazing movie, but it's the worst of that trilogy.
Yeah.
So actually not big on the trilogy thirds in the way I am the third in
the third of four
series.
Or five or yeah.
So you needn't have worried because I have the same ranking as you.
Okay.
And I will probably use the word last as well.
Oh, see, this is what I was most curious about. So,
yeah,
I am officially Desperado. I think is a good movie, and I still think it's a good movie. I cannot get over Once Upon a Time in Mexico. I really wanted to give it a second chance. I really disliked that movie when I saw it in a theater.
Oh, okay. I'd never seen it before.
Yeah, and my opinion has not changed.
But I purposefully avoided it.
Okay.
It's one because it's been it's a 2003 movie. I've had nearly 20 years to see it.
Right.
And I've chosen not to.
And you've chosen not to. Well, that's interesting.
I mean, culture has helped me. It's interesting that when you put this up on the IMDb, it's like the fourth or fifth Once Upon a Time.
Right.
You have to go
exactly.
down. You have to do America. You have to do China.
Right.
It's ranked to in terms of the world rankings, it's like right at the bottom. So yeah, I was coming at it from a different angle. So you said good, bad, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I have the same.
Okay.
I think Desperado there's enough good performances, direction, editing, cinematography.
Thank you. Yeah.
Music.
Yes.
I love the way it handles itself as
especially
a sequel.
To me, almost the first half of that movie. Maybe not quite half, but the first third of that movie to me, I see real vision.
Yeah.
And he is bringing to bear all of his skills and all the things you just talked about, directing, editing, musical choices. Everything is coming together in a way that still works.
Absolutely, yeah. And another thing that, in both Tarantino and Rodriguez's work that I admire is they make seemingly superficial movies that have a lot of ideas behind them.
Yes. And that's one of my
big
notes for Desperado. Yes.
Yeah. On the downside,
because there are things in that movie that I would not forgive if they weren't, if it wasn't a part of the movie, if it's not talked about, but it is. It's in the script. It's in the writing. It's in the characters' choices. So there are,
And that's also why it's not a retread in the same way that Die Harder is, because they typically, and this is what I mean about I like the way it handles itself as a sequel. They typically acknowledge when they are resetting and replaying, like that becomes part of the they're sort of self-reflexive, self-referential when they know they're pulling the same shtick again.
Yeah.
On the downside, I'd say this movie has a real problem with forward momentum. And
I know exactly what you're saying, and that has been my complaint about the movie since I first saw it, and it was not. It was not as big a problem for me this particular viewing.
Yeah, because there's a lot to compensate for that.
Yeah.
It's just it was, and it didn't make me question whether this was a good movie or not. It's just about 20 minutes from the end of the movie, I had the sudden realization that this movie hasn't gone, nor will it go anywhere.
Right.
And I have to take that into account, but it didn't sway me.
Okay.
I mean, and again, this is a Rodriguez canon thing rather than just these movies, but I don't always think Robert Rodriguez knows the value of his own real estate sometimes.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think there's I mean, in both of these movies, but in just a lot of his movies, there's a kind of misplaced emphasis or energy on the wrong characters, the wrong stories, to the detriment of the movie.
Of the movie as a whole.
And I think luckily this movie doesn't. There's parts of this movie I don't understand why we're spending so much time on. But luckily it doesn't. We don't lose the focus.
It doesn't
of what
necessarily detract, or if it does, it does it in increments, like just.
Well, in watching these two movies back to back, I realize that the difference is we don't lose focus on what the movie is and what it's supposed to be. And I can't say that about Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
I cannot either.
So, yeah, there's a lot to like.
Yeah, for me too.
And what is not ideal is not doesn't compromise the movie as much as it possibly could and later would.
Okay.
But it's interesting to see, like, he pulls himself. I think this movie pulls itself back from the brink of the same mistake that condemns Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to get into it. We're going to hash this out.
Oh, so tell me a little more about your rationale for Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Or do you want to keep that as a surprise?
All I'll say about Once Upon a Time in Mexico, its biggest sin is it's so overplotted.
And yet underplotted.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of my notes for Desperado is, and this is when I know a movie's working. 15 minutes in, I know what's going to happen. But not in a bad way. I know the story. Yeah. I know that this guy's not going to stop looking until he finds Bucho. That's our story.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Mexico...
And also, if you've seen El Mariachi, you know where it's going to go.
Exactly.
Because it's the same exact plot.
Because it's the same exact story. And for Once Upon a Time in Mexico, the movie doesn't even know what it's doing so much that Johnny Depp has to explain it for like a second or third time about halfway through the movie.
Mm?
And that's what, I mean, with dialogue that says, let me explain this again, kind of, and that's when you know you're in trouble. And that movie's just, from the get-go, in trouble.
I think we're on the same page. I was going to say that the biggest sin for me of this movie is that it doesn't have any center.
Right.
That it's there's no point of identification. We don't know
this movie doesn't know
whose
if
story
it's...
we're supposed to be following, what indeed that story is.
That movie doesn't know if this is El Mariachi's story or Johnny Depp's story.
And I think there's a good movie in there, in the framework of this movie.
I do too,
but it's not the one they choose to put on screen.
No.
Except in the form of flashback.
Exactly right.
I want to see them. I want to see the movie that comes between these two movies.
Right.
It's so funny that I've been listening to a podcast called, I don't know why they were talking about this on a podcast called ABC Devo. Shout out to Pete the Retailer, former guest of the show, who is on that podcast. And they were talking about something which I thought of here. It's like hearing about better sounding movies than the one you're watching in the dialogue of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they use the example of, well, it's very relevant to us, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. When Indy's being interrogated after the infamous jump the fridge moment.
Right.
And he talks about what he did during World War II. And I think it was John Ingle is the commentator who said, "That sounds great. Why aren't I watching that movie?"
Right.
And I felt every time we went into flashback in Once Upon a Time in Mexico, I felt the same thing.
Exactly. That was a movie I would like to see. Stay tuned for my pitch.
Yeah. Selma Hayek's Kill Bill.
Right.
I'm there.
Yeah. I'm on board. All right. Well, anything left for you before we jump head first into Desperado for our next episode? Anything you got to get off your chest in terms of ranking or declaring?
No, I think one of the doing this podcast in 2021. That's
actually interesting to me because you're looking at. Did you see Desperado when it originally came out?
I saw Desperado when it originally came out.
Okay, but not Once Upon a Time.
No. I had a bad feeling about to go back to the George Lucas canon.
Right.
I had a bad feeling about it. That was entirely vindicated when I started to watch the movie. Yeah, I just had a sense that I tell you what, and I won't elaborate further because we're going to spend a whole episode talking about it. I just thought, for so many reasons, wrong place, wrong time for this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2021, one of the kind of pleasures that perhaps people wouldn't have had definitely wouldn't have had while watching these movies was to see the development of Danny Trejo as an action lead.
Right.
I mean, it very much feels like he's Robert Rodriguez's personal project. Like, it's like a Pygmalion in reverse. He starts out in Desperado with short hair, not speaking, little bit badass, dies very early. Yeah. Next movie, long hair, Trejo speaks, dies a little later in the movie.
Right.
Next is Machete.
Totally.
Who he makes 2, possibly 3. We don't know where in space is right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, it's just lovely to see the seeds, the germination of like Danny Trejo as a mythos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
in these movies, and again, it feels like, will Robert Rodriguez.
You can trace his whole career through Robert Rodriguez movies, even though he's done so much, but you can, like, his growth.
He still does, like, student films. The guy, I mean, apart from everything else, the guy's a mensch.
Right. Plus, he's got a great taco shop.
Well, if I've heard him interviewed, and if, like, student filmmakers approach him to do stuff, he does it. He says, it's like, well, this is how I started out. Why am I going to deny anyone that? I mean, that is rare.
That's so cool.
Like, actually cares about those things. But it's interesting, like, and that goes into the overall point I have about, does Rodriguez know, like, the value of his own real estate? And maybe if he was making Desperado now, he'd be like, Danny Trejo front and center. No non-speaking extra for him.
Right.
And then obviously, he's made good on that with a possible trilogy of movies based on a fake trailer.
Right, exactly.
I don't think he owes Danny Trejo anything at this point. But I was interested by that. And also, I mean, we'll talk about it, but it's interesting to me that, and we've talked about this so many times, and I think there is a historical thesis here to be had in why politically movies that were made in the turn of the millennium are so much worse than movies made in the mid-90s politically. And I don't know why this is happening. It's counterintuitive that things should get worse. But the big political sins of these movies all happen in the post-2000 movie.
Post-2000, you're right.
And I'm just like... And I think, it's we've talked about this before with the relation to the final... I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I think Final Destination as well. It's like this, I want to say sweet spot, but it's the opposite of that. Like shit spot.
Shit stain.
Where everyone's become so comfortable with the idea that we know the conventions of racism and sexism, that we can be postmodern ironic about it, and they go back to being... And that's even more offensive, because you've taken your eye off the ball. In terms of, like, representation and diversity and doing and saying the right things about marginalized communities. To the point where, that's where you end up with the two Jimmys, the two talk show Jimmys in blackface within years of each other. It's just insane. I get such a warm, cozy feeling from Desperado in terms of where it is in history.
Yeah.
And exactly the opposite is true as when I see a movie from that horrible 99 to 2003-4 Hollywood movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it makes well, maybe it does make sense. Maybe we need to investigate this, and that's how you end up with Trump in 2016.
Maybe we're onto something. Maybe we found a breadcrumb trail that we're going to follow through sequels that
leads to the election of a neo-fascist to the American presidency.
That leads to an answer as to the how and the why.
But
all right.
I wasn't going to go there, but you made me think about it, and I just couldn't hold back.
No, I agree with you completely. But we'll be talking about it as we talk Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Oh yeah, that's the final thing. Let's go full circle. This is a trilogy after all. What do we call this? That was the first thing you said. What the fuck? It's the what? Should we just call it the what the fuck? What the fuck edition? I mean, because retrospectively, it's been called the Mexico trilogy, which is a bit weird.
To me is weird. I actually, my first thought was to say the Desperado edition, just because I gravitate towards that movie, and it's the one I like the most of the three.
Yes. But then it makes it sound like you're talking about.
But that feels unfair to the other two movies, so that's why I did not do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you say the El Mariachi trilogy because he's the central character.
He is. So. Or
but
just
we're not doing El Mariachi.
The L edition. As in the
edition.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have different thoughts on I almost said Desperado series again. If you have thoughts on the El Mariachi series, you let us know. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. By all means, send an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, I am Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. You'll be hearing us next time with Desperado. Say goodbye, Tom.
I'm all by myself. I like it that way. Best line in these movies.
All right. Stay tuned, everyone. If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
stay on target
and check out the Sounds in Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
stay on target.
Find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to
stay on target.
That's the Sounds in Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you.